In the heart of Florida's Everglades National Wildlife Refuge, the old truck rattled along the dirt trail like it had for decades. Behind the wheel sat Amos Reed, a grizzled 70-year-old with skin weathered like the bark of the cypress trees and eyes still sharp under his faded ranger cap. Retirement never really suited him. Every morning, without fail, Amos made his rounds through the refuge, checking on old friends, both the two-legged and the four-legged kinds. Locals spoke his name with a kind of reverence. He was the man who'd pulled a bleeding panther cub from a poacher's snare, who'd nursed orphaned owls back to flight, who once stared down an angry alligator and won. Young rangers like Jake and Caleb idolized him. Even the animals seemed to know Amos wasn't a threat. Deer didn't bolt when he passed, and gators barely flicked their tails at his approach. The truck creaked as he pulled to a stop near a clearing, where an injured gorilla had recently been relocated after a rescue mission. Amos reached for the door handle, his hand trembling just a little more than usual. As he stepped onto the grass, a sharp pain knifed through his chest. He gasped, clutching at his shirt, stumbling forward. The world blurred around him. The swamp grass, the distant trees, the gleam of morning sun on water. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the dirt, the taste of iron filling his mouth. Somewhere, his radio crackled, but he couldn't reach it. His heart thudded unevenly against his ribs as his vision dimmed. Amos Reed, legend of the wild, savior of countless creatures, lay crumpled and gasping in the same wilderness he had spent his life protecting. The narrator's voice cut through the rising silence. Amos lived for the wild, but today the wild might lose him. 15 years earlier, deep in the refuge's northern stretch, Amos crouched low in the mud, motioning for the young ranger behind him to stay quiet. Beside him, Jake, then barely out of training, nodded, his heart hammering. In a clearing ahead, a family of gorillas, rare in this part of the world, were tangled in cruel poachers' nets. Amos moved with the steady patience of a man who knew every breath mattered. Knife in hand, he approached the largest male, a hulking figure with a gash bleeding down his flank. The gorilla's dark eyes flickered with pain but not anger. Amos whispered softly, a calming rhythm he used with frightened animals, and eased the net from the creature's arms. "Hang in there, big guy," Amos murmured, pressing a bandage to the wound with calloused, careful hands. He tied it off with strips of his own shirt. Jake watched, wide-eyed, as the massive animal allowed Amos's touch without a fight. They named him Brutus, after the strength he showed simply surviving. Over the years, Brutus healed in the refuge's safe zone. Most days, Amos would swing by his enclosure, leaning on the fence, quietly talking to him about nothing and everything. In his pocket, he carried a small wooden charm, a carved token he had whittled long ago, a symbol of protection, and on one visit, he pressed it gently into Brutus's huge, scarred hand. Brutus held onto it like it was something sacred. Back in the present, Amos's radio crackled weakly. Somewhere between shallow breaths, his faint voice reached Jake and Caleb, who were scanning the area nearby. "Jake, need help." Jake's blood turned cold. He grabbed the radio, shouting back, "Hold on, Amos, we're coming." They found him moments later, collapsed by the grass, his face pale, sweat soaking through his shirt. Caleb checked his pockets, no medication, nothing to help. Jake knelt by his mentor, gripping his hand. "Stay with us, Amos, please." Above them, the early morning sun rose higher, casting long shadows, and somewhere, deep in the safe zone, a massive figure stirred restlessly, clutching an old wooden charm. Jake's hands shook as he fumbled for his radio. "Emergency! Ranger down near the west clearing. Send the med team now." His voice cracked with panic. Caleb, meanwhile, hauled Amos's frail body into his arms, cradling him like a broken bird. The med team's jeep roared over the dirt road within minutes, tires skidding. They lifted Amos onto a stretcher, Jake gripping his limp hand the whole time, whispering, "Hang on, old man, you're tougher than this." The medical bay inside the refuge, a simple room with a single aging defibrillator, hummed with urgency. Doctors surrounded Amos, Jake and Caleb stood back, fists clenched, helpless. Pulses weak. Starting CPR, one doctor barked. Jake could barely breathe as he watched them press down on Amos's chest. The ranger's old boots still caked in the Everglades mud sticking out from the stretcher. The defibrillator whined as they charged it. Clear. Amos's body jerked with the shock, but his heart monitor stayed stubbornly flat. Another round. Another jolt. Jake felt himself whispering under his breath. Prayers he hadn't said in years. Out in the refuge, word spread fast. Rangers stopped mid-task. Volunteers dropped their gear. Even animals sensed something amiss. The chirps, the rustles, the distant roars. All fell eerily silent. And far from the med bay, inside the safe zone, Brutus was no exception. The massive gorilla shuffled anxiously, head swinging toward the distant hum of machines he didn't understand but somehow feared. He grunted low, deep enough that nearby rangers paused and stared. Jake gripped the stretcher's rail as Amos's body went still. "Don't you dare leave us," he rasped. The narrator's voice cut through. Something in the wild knew he was slipping away, and it wasn't ready to lose him. The steady whine of the heart monitor faded into a chilling flatline. One doctor stepped back, pulling off his gloves slowly. "I'm sorry. We lost him," he whispered. The room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Jake dropped into the nearest chair, his hands burying into his hair as silent sobs racked his body. Caleb leaned heavily against the wall, staring blankly at Amos's still form. Around them, the refuge's staff stood with bowed heads, the weight of the moment pressing down like the thick Everglades humidity. The news spread through the refuge like wildfire. Radios crackled. Whispers turned into soft cries. Men and women who had faced down hurricanes and wildfires now wept openly for the man who had taught them what it truly meant to protect the wild. Amos's family arrived not long after, faces pale and stricken. His daughter, a mirror of Amos's stubborn kindness, nodded tearfully when the staff gently asked if he could be laid to rest here, among the creatures he loved. Preparations began in hushed, reverent tones. A wooden stretcher, hand-built by rangers years ago for emergencies, was chosen to carry him one last time. Jake placed Amos's old ranger hat carefully on his chest, smoothing it with trembling fingers. The narrator's voice came low and soft. He gave everything to the wild, but the wild wasn't ready to let him go. Out beyond the medical bay, in the safe zone, Brutus paced restlessly. In his massive, calloused hand, he clutched a tiny wooden charm, worn smooth over years, a piece of Amos that had stayed with him all this time. The gorilla's grunts grew louder, deeper, as if he could sense the absence, as if he already knew. The sun barely peeked over the Everglades when the ceremony began. A hush fell over the field where Amos's stretcher lay. Locals, rangers, and old friends gathered in a rough circle, heads bowed. His ranger badge glinted weakly in the morning light, pinned to his chest beside his worn hat. The air was thick with grief and respect. Jake stepped forward, voice breaking as he led a prayer. Caleb lit a stick of incense, its smoke curling toward the open sky. Some whispered memories. Others just stood silently, unable to find the words. Then, from the edge of the safe zone, came a low, rumbling grunt. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-breath. Brutus emerged from the trees, his massive frame moving with a slow, deliberate pace. Some people instinctively backed away, fear flickering across their faces, but no one ran. Brutus wasn't charging. He wasn't angry. He was mourning. The massive gorilla approached the stretcher, every step measured, careful. His scarred chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. In one hand, he still clutched the tiny wooden charm, the same one Amos had given him so long ago. Brutus reached the stretcher and paused. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the man who had once saved him. Then, with surprising tenderness, he knelt, placing the charm carefully beside Amos's hand. Jake choked back a sob, recognizing the deep scar across Brutus's side. The same scar from all those years ago. The narrator's voice came soft, filled with awe. 15 years ago, Amos saved him. Today, he came to say goodbye. Brutus bowed his head low, closing his eyes. Around him, not a sound stirred. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. A legend was saying farewell to another. When the ceremony ended, no one rushed to leave. The Rangers and Amos's family gently lifted the stretcher, carrying it through the open field toward a grassy patch near a lazy bend in the river, Amos's favorite spot. The sunlight warmed the ground where he had often sat, watching the animals he loved roam free. Brutus followed behind them, each of his heavy steps soft against the earth. No chains, no cages, just loyalty. They lowered Amos into a grave dug by loving hands, lining it with wildflowers picked from around the refuge. His old ranger hat rested atop his chest, and the tiny wooden charm from Brutus was tucked beneath his folded hands. Jake stood at the head of the grave, voice trembling. "You taught us to listen, to protect, to love this wild world like it was family. We promise you, we won't stop." Caleb wiped his eyes, unable to speak. As they began to cover the grave, Brutus let out a deep, heart-wrenching bellow. A sound so raw, so full of grief, it cut straight through everyone standing there. The ground seemed to hold its breath. When the last shovel of earth was laid, a simple stone marker was placed at the head. It read, "Amos Reed, Guardian of the Wild, forever among us." Brutus remained by the grave long after the others drifted away. He sat, unmoving, his dark eyes fixed on the mound of earth. Hours passed, but he didn't leave, and he didn't stop visiting. Day after day, Brutus would appear, sometimes bringing small gifts, branches, flowers, shiny stones, and place them gently at the grave, silent tributes to the man who had given him a second chance. The refuge changed after that. A new plaque was placed at the entrance, in memory of Amos Reed, protector of the Everglades. Visitors often found fresh wildflowers at his grave, but few ever saw who left them. The narrator's voice returned, soft but steady. Amos's love for the wild lives on, in the gorilla who never forgot him. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. What's a bond you'll never forget?